Hello and welcome back to Cursed Lullabies. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoyed drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered like cursed lullabies, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. Looking back now, I don't think I ever really escaped that apartment. I left the building. I carried my boxes out, handed in the keys, and rode a cab all the way across the city with the windows cracked, like fresh air could wash something off me. I checked into a hotel with clean sheets and bright hallways and a front desk that smiled like nothing bad had ever happened there. I told myself I was safe. But something from that second bedroom came with me anyway. Or maybe it didn't even need to follow. Maybe it had already settled somewhere inside my life the moment I turned that knob. The warnings were there from the beginning. I just didn't treat them like warnings. I treated them like odd details. Like the weird rules you sometimes get with cheap places. The rent was the first sign. It was so low it didn't make sense for the city I'd just moved to. I had been hunting for weeks, watching prices climb higher the farther I looked. Every affordable option either meant roommates, roaches, or a 2-hour commute. I was 23, starting my first real job, and my paycheck was the kind that disappeared fast once you added rent, transit, groceries, and student loans. I needed a break. When I saw the listing, I felt like I'd found it. The photos were blurry and old, but the place looked simple enough. A small kitchen, a living room, 1 bedroom, and a second smaller bedroom. The building was older, a plain concrete block on the edge of the city where the neighborhoods started to thin out. The address wasn't trendy, but it was close enough to a subway line. The price was what pulled me in. It was the kind of rent you don't argue with, because if you argue, it might disappear. The day I went to see it, the weather was already hot. The air outside was heavy and gray, the kind that sticks to your skin. The building didn't help. The entrance smelled like wet cement. The stairs were damp even though it hadn't rained. Each step had a dark stain near the edge, as if water had been dripping there for years. The hallway on my floor smelled like mildew mixed with old cooking oil, like someone had fried food in that corridor every day and then never cleaned it. I remember thinking, this is what cheap smells like. The landlord met me at the door. She was an elderly woman, short and neat, with thin hands and careful movements. Her hair was pinned back in a way that made her look strict, but her face wasn't unkind. Her voice, though, was controlled, not harsh, just cautious, like she measured every word. She showed me the living room first, then the kitchen, then the bathroom. Everything was worn but not destroyed. The walls had been painted a plain off-white. The floors were scratched, the faucets worked, the windows opened. It was enough. It was more than enough for what I could afford. Then she walked me down the short hall to the bedrooms. The main bedroom was small, but I could fit a bed and a dresser. The second bedroom door was shut. When I reached for it, she put her hand over mine, not grabbing, just placing her fingers there, stopping me the way you stop a child from touching a hot stove. That room is storage, she said. Oh, I said. Because I didn't know what else to say, I assumed she meant she kept old furniture in there or boxes or supplies for the building. It was a little unusual, but not unheard of. She didn't move her hand away. Do not open it, she continued. Do not clean it. Do not ask. I laughed a little, mostly from nerves. I won't touch it. Her eyes held mine for a second longer than normal. Then she nodded like we'd made an agreement. Like it mattered. On the lease, nothing mentioned a storage room. Nothing mentioned restrictions. There was just the rent, the deposit, and the standard rules about noise, damage, and pets. I signed anyway. The price was too good, and I was tired of looking. I told myself I was being practical. The first few nights, nothing happened. I unpacked slowly after work. I learned which light switch buzzed when I flipped it, and which kitchen drawer stuck. I figured out how far I could turn the shower knob before the water went lukewarm. It wasn't home yet, but it was mine. I avoided that second bedroom the way you avoid a closet with someone else's junk in it. I walked past the door and didn't give it much thought. On the fifth night, everything shifted. I woke up a little after 2 in the morning. It wasn't from a dream. It was from sound. At first, I thought it was someone in the hallway, because old buildings carry noise. But the sound wasn't outside my front door. It was inside my apartment, right on the other side of the second bedroom door. Footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking barefoot on a hard floor. I could hear the light slap of skin on concrete, that soft, flat sound bare feet make when they're careful. The steps were not rushed. They weren't random. They had rhythm. Then something else joined it. A lower noise, softer but more disturbing. It was like wet cloth dragging across the floor, as if someone was pulling a soaked sheet behind them. I lay in bed with my eyes open. My body didn't want to move. My brain tried to explain it. Pipes knock, buildings settle, neighbors drop things. It could be anything. But the sound was too close. It was not the wall creaking. It was not water running. It was inside that room. The footsteps stopped. The dragging sound continued for a few more seconds, then stopped too. The silence that followed felt pressed against my ears, as if the apartment was holding its breath. I did not get up. I did not go into the hall. I stayed under my blanket, staring at the faint shape of my bedroom door, waiting for another sound. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember is morning light. When I got up, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. My water glass was on the counter, but it had been turned so it faced the hall, as if it had been positioned to look at the second bedroom door. It was a ridiculous thought, and yet I couldn't shake it. Then I saw my towel. I'd left it hanging in the bathroom. Now it lay in the hall, right in front of the second bedroom door, folded loosely like someone had dropped it there on purpose. And on the doorknob was my black hair tie. I touched it with 2 fingers. It was my hair tie. I had used it the night before and left it on my dresser. I was sure I had. Seeing it on that knob was like seeing a personal item pinned to a warning sign. I stood there for a full minute, looking between the hair tie and the door, trying to figure out how I could have done it myself without remembering. I checked the front door lock. It was still latched. The windows were shut. I was alone. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the sound of bare feet on concrete. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself, stress can make your memory unreliable. That night, before bed, I took photos with my phone. I photographed the hall. I photographed my towel in the bathroom. I photographed the water glass where I placed it, turned away from the hall. I felt stupid doing it, but I also felt like I needed a record. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. In the morning, the photos didn't make me feel better. The towel was in the hall again, not exactly the same position, but close. The water glass had shifted slightly, and the hair tie was not on my dresser where I'd left it. It was looped neatly around the second bedroom knob again, like a small black ring marking the door. It kept happening. Every night, I would set things in place. Every morning, something would be different. Sometimes it was small, a spoon in the sink that hadn't been there, a chair angled toward the hall, a book left open when I'd closed it. It was never messy. It wasn't like someone was tearing the place apart. It was more like someone was arranging the apartment, gently moving little pieces to show me they could. On the third morning, I noticed a thin line of gray dust along the bottom of the second bedroom door. It looked like the kind of dust you see after drywall work, fine and soft. gathered into a narrow ridge. I crouched down and ran my finger near it without touching it. The smell hit me right away. Burned incense. Not strong. Just faint, like the after smell in a room where someone had lit a stick hours ago. It didn't fit anything else in the apartment. I hadn't burned incense. I didn't even own any. I texted the landlord that afternoon. I kept it simple because I didn't want to sound crazy. Hi, is there a noise problem in the spare room? I'm hearing footsteps at night. Her reply came so fast it felt like she'd been waiting for my message. Whatever you hear, do not open it. No greeting, no questions, no explanation, just that. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I typed a few different responses and deleted them. Finally, I sent, okay. After that, I stopped using the living room at night. I started doing everything in my bedroom. I kept my phone charged beside me. I slept with a lamp on. I locked my bedroom door, and for the first time in my life, I pushed a chair under the handle like I'd seen in movies. It didn't even make sense. If something was in the second bedroom, it was already inside the apartment. A chair wouldn't stop it. But fear is not logical. Fear makes you do small, useless things just so you can feel like you're doing something. By 1:50 a.m., I would be awake, waiting. Some nights were quiet. Those were the worst, because quiet felt like a trick. Other nights, the footsteps came again, slow, bare, moving from one side of the room to the other, sometimes stopping for long stretches, sometimes pacing, and always, at some point, that dragging sound like wet cloth or skin sliding over concrete. I never heard a voice, never a cough, never a sigh, only movement, only the suggestion of a body. I started thinking about leaving. But leaving isn't easy when you're broke, when you've paid a deposit, when you've just moved, when you're trying to prove to yourself you can handle adult life in a big city. I told myself I'd give it another week. I told myself I'd ask again for details. I told myself a lot of things. Then July delivered one of those nights that feel like punishment. The heat stayed trapped in the building. Even with my windows open, the air wouldn't move. I turned on the air conditioner, one of those old wall units that rattles and spits out weak cold, and it made a strained sound and died. The fan stopped. The room went still. I lay in bed, sweating, listening to my own breathing. Around 1 a.m, I noticed something that didn't fit the heat. Cold air. It slid from under the second bedroom door and crept along the tiles. I felt it from my room, even from down the hall, like a line of refrigerated air spilling out into the apartment. I got up and stepped into the hall. The difference in temperature was immediate. The tiles near that door were damp, as if cold had pulled moisture from the air. My mind filled with justifications. Maybe there was a vent in there. Maybe the window was open and the night air was cooler. Maybe the landlord had a working AC unit in that room. Maybe. And a worse thought followed. What if this was the only way I could make the apartment livable tonight? The heat was messing with my head. I was exhausted. My logic got lazy. I told myself I would open the door for 1 minute. That was it. I wouldn't go in. I wouldn't touch anything. I just let the cold air move through, then shut it again, and pretend I'd never done it. The knob was cold when I grasped it, not cool like metal in air-conditioned space, cold like it had been kept in a freezer. It made the skin of my palm ache. I turned it anyway. The door opened without a sound. No creak, no complaint. It swung inward like it had been waiting. The room was not full of storage. It was almost empty. There was a bare wooden bed frame with a thin, flat mattress that looked too old to be used. There was an old dressing table with one drawer half open. And there was a mirror above it, filmed in dust so thick it dulled the glass. No boxes, no furniture stacked, no cleaning supplies, no landlord's storage. Just those three things, like a simple set in a play. Cold air poured out of the room in a steady stream. It didn't feel like a draft. It felt like something exhaling. I took one step inside before I could stop myself. My foot landed on a floor that looked like concrete under thin, worn tile. The chill rose through my sock into my bones. That was when my body stopped cooperating. It wasn't dramatic like getting thrown against a wall. It was quieter, and that made it worse. My throat tightened as if I'd swallowed something too big. My fingers tingled, then went numb. The sweat on my back turned cold all at once, like someone had pressed an ice pack to my spine. And I knew, in the same simple way you know when someone is standing behind you in a line, that something was right behind me. The air felt crowded. The space between my back and whatever was there felt gone, like the room had closed in. Then a hand settled on my left shoulder. It wasn't heavy. It didn't squeeze. It didn't shove me forward. It was light and patient, as if it had all the time in the world and didn't need to hurry. That gentle pressure made me want to scream more than a hard grip would have. It felt like ownership, like familiarity, like this wasn't an attack, but a touch that said, finally. A car passed outside. Its headlights swept across the second bedroom, cutting through the dust in the air for a brief moment. The mirror caught the light, and for 1 second, the dusty glass showed both of us. I was in the doorway, half inside the room, frozen. Behind me stood a woman in a pale dress. Her hair hung forward, hiding her face. One hand rested on my shoulder. Her other arm hung beside mine, too long, too still, like it didn't bend the way it should. The strangest part wasn't even her shape. It was the floor. The light hit the ground beneath us, and I could see my shadow faintly in the doorway. But she left no shadow at all. The headlights moved on. The room dimmed again. The mirror became a dull gray surface. The wet dragging sound started behind my legs. This time it was close enough that I felt it, not with my skin, but with my nerves, like the way you feel something crawling near you before it touches you. The sound slid along the floor, slow and steady, like something heavy and damp being pulled toward the doorway. Something inside me snapped free. My body found movement again, sudden and ugly. I stumbled backward hard enough to smack my shoulder against the hallway wall. I twisted, yanked myself out from under that light hand, and slammed the door shut with both palms. For half a second there was silence. Then a scream came from inside the room. It was thin and sharp, nothing like a human scream full of breath. It sounded metallic, like a nail dragged down glass, like a piece of metal bending the wrong way. It went on too long, as if the sound didn't need lungs to keep it going. It ended abruptly, like someone had cut it off. I stood there shaking, staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. Nothing happened. I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with my shoes on, my phone in my hand, watching the early light creep into the room. Every small noise made me flinch. Every shift in the building made me imagine the knob turning. At sunrise, I called the landlord. My voice was uneven, and I hated that she could hear fear in it. As soon as I said, I opened the second bedroom, her tone changed. The careful politeness vanished. "You went in?" she asked. "You really went in." It wasn't surprise exactly. It was frustration, like I'd touched something dangerous she'd told me not to touch, and now she had to deal with it. I started. "I told you not to open that door," she cut in, sharper now. "I told you. I'm leaving," I said. Today, there was a pause. I heard her breathe out slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "The tenant before you died in that room," she said. The words didn't land right away. My brain tried to file them under rumor, under exaggeration, under landlord drama. But the chill in my shoulder, the memory of that light hand, made it hard to pretend. "How?" I asked. She didn't answer that. She either didn't know or didn't want to say it out loud. The others heard her too. She continued. They all left after opening it. I whispered, "It is not easy to leave a building like this empty," she said. And for a moment she sounded tired, not scary. Then her voice firmed up again. "I warn people. That is all I can do." I didn't argue. I didn't ask more. I didn't want more details. Details would make it real in a way I couldn't handle. I packed as fast as I could without going near that door. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I didn't even wash my face. I threw clothes into bags, grabbed my laptop and chargers, scooped up whatever I could carry. I kept expecting to hear footsteps in the hall, right outside my bedroom. I kept expecting the dragging sound to start again, closer this time, as if it had learned the layout of the apartment. I never looked directly at the second bedroom door again, not after the moment I shut it. I couldn't stand the idea of seeing my hair tie there one more time like a small, neat reminder that it knew where I was. By noon, I was out. I dumped the keys at the landlord's office without making eye contact and left. I got into a cab and told the driver a hotel address across the city, as far as I could justify paying for. The whole ride, my skin crawled. Every time the car slowed at a light, I felt like something might tap the window, like a hand might appear against the glass. The hotel was a normal chain place, bright and bland, with patterned carpet and framed prints on the walls. I checked in with shaking hands. The woman at the desk asked if I wanted a wake-up call. I almost laughed. I didn't want to wake up at all. In the room, I pulled the curtains tight and turned on every light. The lamps, the bathroom light, the little light over the entryway. I checked the closet. I checked behind the curtains. I checked the bathroom, the shower. Behind the door, I knew how irrational it was, but I did it anyway. When I finally lay down, I left the TV on low volume, just to fill the silence. The voices from some late-night show washed over me, meaningless and comforting. I must have slept in short bursts. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the mirror catching the car headlights, saw the outline of her behind me. Just before dawn, I woke up suddenly. The air in the room smelled like burned incense. Not strong, not smoky. Just that faint, dry scent, like something had been lit and blown out nearby. My heart started hammering. I sat up and listened. The hotel was quiet. No footsteps, no dragging, just the distant hum of the building's ventilation. I told myself it was in my head. I told myself maybe someone in the room next door had incense. Maybe it was from the hallway. Maybe it had soaked into my clothes from the apartment and I was only noticing it now. Then I saw my black hair tie. It was hanging from the hotel closet handle, looped neatly the same way it had been looped around the second bedroom doorknob. For a moment, I actually felt relief, because my first thought was simple. I must have packed it. I must have grabbed it off the knob by mistake while I was rushing. That would explain it. That would make this normal. Then my memory caught up to my hope. The last time I had seen that hair tie clearly, undeniably, was when I'd found it sitting on the second bedroom doorknob after a night of footsteps. I remembered the exact way it looked against the metal. I remembered thinking it was like a tag. I had not taken it with me. I was sure of that because I had avoided that door completely. I had avoided even looking at it. The hair tie swung slightly as the air conditioner clicked on. A small movement, like something had just let go of it. I didn't touch it. I didn't take a photo. I didn't call the front desk. I just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at that simple black loop, while the incense smell settled into the room around me. That was the moment I understood what I've tried not to understand ever since. I don't think I escaped that apartment. I think I only changed locations. I think I carried the idea of that door with me, and whatever was behind it noticed. I think it learned my habits, my objects, my small routines. I think it found a way to remind me that rules can be broken, and once they are, You can't always put things back where they belong. Because even now, in different places, in different rooms, in different cities, I still lose small things. I still find them later, in the one spot I know I didn't put them. A towel in front of a door I never use. A glass turned to face a dark hallway. A faint smell of burned incense in a room that should smell like nothing at all. And sometimes when I wake up in the early hours of the morning, I lie perfectly still and listen, waiting to hear bare feet on a hard floor, waiting to hear something wet and heavy, dragging slowly closer. Story 2. Another day, another job. One day I'd love to find something steady, something that doesn't come with a high chance of getting hurt or killed, and something that comes with paid time off. Instead, Jake and I have bounced through so many kinds of work that I can't even list them all without forgetting something. We've cleaned crime scenes, we've done construction, we've tended bar, we even tried being amateur exorcists once. Don't ask. I'll only say this. If the Pope ever saw the results, he might forgive us for how badly we did everything else. Right then, we needed work again. The last job ended fast, and it ended weird even for us. So when we saw a new listing for a simple cleaning and painting job, it felt like a gift. The description was strange, and the location was worse. An old, abandoned building near town. Still, it sounded safe on paper. No blood, no bodies, and if luck was on our side, no creepy cursed dolls hiding in a basement. We found the listing about a month earlier. It said a crew was needed to clean and paint an old flea market close to downtown. Mostly cover-up painting, the ad claimed. Nothing complicated. The pay was way too good for something that simple, which should have been a warning. But when you're broke, warning signs start looking like decorations. Jake and I took our van out to the address to meet the contact. Jake was grinning the whole drive the same way he always did before a new job, like he honestly enjoyed the idea that everything might fall apart around us. Maybe he did. I wasn't excited about danger. I was excited about money. Come on, Jake said, trying to keep the mood light while he flipped through songs on his phone like his life depended on it. I'm sure this one will be normal. He finally landed on Battery by Metallica and reached for the volume. After all, what's the worst? Don't finish that sentence, I snapped. He shrugged like I was being dramatic and turned the music up until my warning disappeared under the guitars. We drove for a while, and the closer we got, the more the neighborhood changed. The buildings looked tired. Lots were empty. Windows were boarded, the kind of place you don't stop at night unless you have to. Jake checked the directions again. This is it. Old Mayhew's Flea Market. I'm honestly shocked this place closed. Who could resist such fine offerings? He pointed at an old sign hanging crooked on the front of a big building. Someone had spray painted over most of it, but you could still make out a cartoonish man in an ugly suit, smiling like he was trying too hard. The sign looked like something made in a rush, back when the world still printed things on cheap plastic and hoped for the best. We parked in a cracked lot outside the building. Up close, the place was huge. It must have been busy once. Now it looked like it could collapse if you leaned on it wrong. Broken windows dotted the walls. Boards had been nailed over random openings like someone had tried to patch a sinking ship with scrap wood. Graffiti covered nearly everything. Then I noticed something else. Around the building's perimeter, there was a ring on the ground. Thin, uneven, and bright. It looked like white paint poured in a loose circle, like someone had tried to draw a boundary. It didn't look like a normal marking for construction or safety. I didn't like it. I also didn't understand why anyone would pay to clean this place instead of tearing it down. But that wasn't my job. My job was to show up, work, and leave with a check. A car pulled into the lot behind us a few minutes later. It was an Oldsmobile, older but well cared for, polished enough that you could tell the owner respected it. A tall man stepped out wearing a cowboy hat like he'd been born with it. Howdy, boys, he said, walking up with an easy stride. Name's Earl Mayhew. Good to meet you. Name's Jake, and this here's my friend. Jake tried some kind of country accent that sounded like it came from a bad movie. I cringed and waited for Mayhew to get offended. Instead, Mayhew laughed and slapped his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. I offered my hand, but Mayhew didn't even pause. He walked past me toward the building like the introductions were just a formality he'd already forgotten. Well then, he said, pulling keys from his pocket, now that we've met, follow me. I'll show you around, and you can decide if you want the job. Before stepping in, he leaned forward and peered into the dark, like he expected something to be waiting. Then he stepped inside and waved us after him. I know she don't look like much, he said, his voice echoing in the empty entrance. But we had good times here. I can't stand the thought of selling it. Used to be the most successful flea market in the county. Folks came from all over the state. Hundreds of vendors, steady crowds. He sighed, like he was talking to the building more than to us. Then he blinked and remembered we were there. Sorry, boys. Memories. Come on, I'll show you what I need done. He led us down a dim hallway and into a big central space, like the main market floor. Trash and debris covered the ground. Old booths and tables sat broken and pushed around like they'd been thrown. Graffiti was everywhere, layered over older graffiti like years of people had been trying to claim it. Definitely a fixer-upper, Jake muttered. Jake noticed instantly and tried to recover. But, good bones. Good character. I get why you want to keep it. Mayhew grunted like that was acceptable. Jake gave me a small thumbs up like he'd avoided disaster. I rolled my eyes. Mayhew stopped near a wall and looked it over carefully. He studied certain spots like he was inspecting damage after a storm. Before I could ask what he was seeing, he held up a hand, then pointed. There, he said. Right there. That's what I need you gentlemen to take care of. I stared at the wall. At first, it just looked dirty. Then I saw it. Dark streaks, like dried black paint in strange patterns. Not quite graffiti, not quite a smear. What is that? I asked. Mayhew's mouth tightened. That is what you'll be cleaning. This place has been turned over recently, believe it or not. I got a crew working nights. No matter how much we cover it, it comes back. He paused like he didn't want to say the next part. I need y'all to cover it up before he swallowed. Before it changes. Jake and I stared at him. Changes, I repeated. I know it sounds crazy, Mayhew said quickly. But it's true. That art, if you can call it that, can change. It spreads, slow and steady. If it ain't cleaned up, it transforms. When the images start forming, he shuddered, just slightly, but it was real. Best not to let it get that far. We've had incidents when it did. I didn't like the word incidents. It was the kind of word people use when the truth is worse. Mayhew straightened, trying to sound practical again. If you're thorough, it won't be an issue. Paint is what works. Not cheap paint. Decent stuff holds it back longer. We tried paint thinner, thought maybe we could wipe it out for good. Didn't stop it. Just left me with gallons of thinner I had to store inside. He nodded deeper into the building like the thinner was waiting there. Soon as I get the funds, I'm wallpapering this whole place and replacing the floors. See how it likes that? He laughed, but it came out forced, like he was trying to convince himself. I had questions, like what he meant by it, and why he kept talking like the paint had a mind. But then he pulled out a paper and held it toward us. Few weeks of painting, I'll pay you the whole salary I was paying my last crew, 5 men. I took the paper before Jake could. I read the number and felt my stomach flip. Jake leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Whoa." It was more than good. It was the kind of money that makes you stop thinking clearly. "Count us in," Jake and I said at the same time. Mayhew smiled wider, like he'd been waiting for that. Excellent. Start tomorrow, bright and early. 6 a.m., we'll go over the rules. We arrived before sunrise the next day. I was half asleep and chugged an energy drink in the van before getting out. Jake bounced out like he'd been asleep for 10 minutes and woke up ready to fight the sun. Mayhew was already there. He was kneeling near the painted white ring with a tape measure, looking irritated. Near him was a dark patch on the ground, like black paint had stained the concrete. As we got closer, I heard him mutter, "Artistic bitch." I cleared my throat. "Morning, Mr. Mayhew." He looked up and snapped into a friendly smile like he'd put on a mask. "Morning, boys. All right, business first. I'm gonna say a few things and I need you to listen. Save questions for the end. You'll be painting most of your shift," he said. "And this ain't a normal painting job. Think of it like you're chasing something that moves." He hesitated, then decided to tell us more. "Long time ago we had a vendor here. Called herself an artist. Truth is, she was more like a witch. I know how that sounds, but it's true. She caused trouble when things didn't go her way. She cursed this place. Then she vanished. Ever since, this black paint shows up, walls, ceilings, floors. On the ceiling, faint but clear, were outlines of 3 faces staring down. No eyes, no mouths, just smooth, blank shapes, like someone had started painting people and stopped halfway. "Like those?" I asked, pointing. Mayhew looked up and went pale. "Oh, Jesus. Yes, like that. Let's step outside for now." He moved fast, like being under those shapes made him feel trapped. We followed him out into the lot, and he took a long, wheezing breath like he'd been holding it in. "Sorry," he said. "Just caught me off guard." Then he continued, voice low. "I had folks cover that stuff every day. It always comes back. At first, I tried ignoring it. Then bad things started happening. Vendors left. Said the place felt unsafe." He spat on the ground like even the memory tasted bad. "Then people started seeing things, getting hurt. Then an incident happened that shut us down." He rubbed his face like he could still see it. "Since then, I've been trying to find a way to fix it, but I can't just walk away. It ain't content staying inside. Every day the art creeps closer to the outside, and the details get clearer." He pointed at the white ring around the building. "That circle matters. If the paint gets past it," he didn't finish that sentence, but the way he looked at the ring made me believe he meant it. "When those details get clear, when eyes form, when mouths form, if you see it," he swallowed, "something bad happens. So paint over everything, be thorough. If you see faces, cover them immediately. Don't wait." He stared at us hard. "And don't listen to anybody or anything besides each other and me. That's important." Jake raised an eyebrow. "So, paint fast, don't stare at faces, don't listen to voices. Easy as pie." Mayhew acted like he didn't hear the sarcasm. He pulled out paperwork. "Sign this contract. I offer real employment, benefits, insurance." Jake scoffed. "We're independent contractors." I almost groaned out loud. Of course he had to mess with the man. Then Jake grinned. "Just kidding. Bring on the paperwork." "Do we get health care?" Mayhew laughed like that was charming. "Fill it out, and you can be eligible for health coverage, long-term disability, and life insurance." He led us to a picnic table set up near the building. We filled out the forms. While I was reading, I noticed something strange. The life insurance paperwork listed Mayhew Industries as the temporary beneficiary. I pointed. "Mr. Mayhew, why does it say the company gets the policy first? When does that change?" He waved it away. "Standard. First 2 weeks, the company holds it. Then it transfers to your beneficiary." That didn't feel standard at all. I almost told Jake to hold off. Then I looked over and saw Jake had already signed and handed his stack back. I sighed and signed too, telling myself it was probably just some weird small business thing. After that, Mayhew showed us a storage shed near the side of the building. Inside were stacks of white paint cans, dozens and dozens, rollers, brushes, trays, everything. Use as much as you need, he said. Thick coats hold longer. Be careful, boys. I'd hate to lose you. He moved in a slight curve like he was avoiding a certain spot. I looked toward the ground and saw that the dark line near the ring, the one he'd been measuring, had shifted. It had been pointing one way earlier. Now it curved toward the path he wasn't taking, like it was following him. I tried not to stare too long. As Mayhew drove away, I asked Jake quietly, "Did that last part bother you? About losing us?" Jake shrugged. "I'm more bothered that you're the one painting over the creepy ceiling faces." He laughed at his own joke like we weren't standing outside a cursed building. We started fast. First, we painted over the thin black trail that had been creeping toward the white ring. White paint covered it easily, like covering a stain. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. "This is going great," Jake said, rolling paint smooth and thick. "Not like it's moving or anything." Jake gestured toward the front door. "Let's go inside and hit the other rooms." We opened the door and both of us froze. The entryway had changed. An hour earlier, the walls were faded white and covered in old graffiti. Now the entire space was full of fresh black murals. Dozens of people, faces everywhere, on the walls, on the ceiling, even rising up from the floor like the building itself was trying to look at us. The faces weren't detailed, but they didn't need to be. There was something worse about them being unfinished, like they were waiting. "Okay," I said quietly, "so that's not ideal." Jake stared for one long second, then swore. Always has to be something. He stepped forward and pressed a roller into the wall like he was trying to show the place who was boss. White paint smeared over black, and as he rolled across a face, I felt something shift in the air. Not a breeze, more like pressure, like the building noticed what we were doing. Jake didn't seem to feel it, or if he did, he didn't care. I wanted to back out, slam the door, and drive away. But we'd seen strange things before, and the pay was real. I cracked open a fresh can of white paint, took a breath, and joined him. At first, we worked like it was any job. Roll, dip, roll again, cover the black shapes, work faster, don't look too long. Try not to think about what Mayhew had said about eyes and mouths. But the longer we painted, the worse it got. The black paint returned behind our work like it was bleeding through. We'd coat a wall thick, step back, and within minutes, dark streaks would rise under the white like bruises under skin. By the time 10 hours passed, only one room looked finished, and even that room didn't feel safe. It felt like the black paint was waiting for us to blink. Jake finally snapped. "This is insane. What is this, some kind of haunting designed to ruin this guy's property value? We're not even being attacked. This thing just keeps undoing our work." He kicked the paint can toward a corner. It clanged and rolled, splashing a little white paint. And even there, where he'd just covered the wall, thin black streaks started to snake through again. "I know," I said, trying to calm him down. "But we get paid by the hour. Even without the bonus, it's still good money. The evening crew should be here soon." As we neared the front door, we heard a voice outside, loud and urgent. "Nathan, where are you? You need to get out of there. It's not safe." Jake and I stopped and looked at each other. Neither of us knew a Nathan. We stepped out and saw a pickup truck parked near our van. A man stood beside it, shouting at the building. But he wouldn't cross the white ring. He looked terrified, like his body wanted to run forward, but his mind wouldn't let him. "Hey," I called. "There's no Nathan here. Are you the night crew?" The man turned toward us, startled by my voice, then confused, then suddenly horrified, as if my question confirmed something awful. "No," he said. No, no, he brought other people. Oh, God. He looked at me like I was proof the world had gone wrong. Please tell me you saw Nathan in there. He's been in there since last night. Okay, slow down. The man took a shaky breath. My name's Roger. Nathan is my friend. We were hired by Mayhew to paint over the weird art. His eyes flicked to the building. Something happened last night. Nathan didn't get out, and I can't remember exactly. He looked like he was trying to force his brain to work. I woke up at home, like I just teleported into bed. I tried calling him, nothing. Then I started remembering pieces, faces, and Nathan standing there staring at a wall, his eyes all wrong. His voice broke. I don't know what's happening, but we have to get him out now. Jake didn't hesitate. He smiled like a man who had been offered free tickets to a disaster. Shall we? He ran in after Roger. I groaned, because of course he did, and followed them back inside. The moment I stepped into the building again, something felt wrong in a new way. The smell of fresh paint was strong, but under it was something sharp and sour, like chemicals and rot mixed together. I glanced at the walls we'd painted. Black tar-like paint oozed down them again, thick and wet, as if our white coats had never happened. Jake rushed ahead, chasing after Roger's voice. I turned a corner, and Roger was gone. Then the building shook. Not a small vibration, a deep, heavy shudder, like something massive had moved under the floor. Jake and I stumbled back toward the front entrance, afraid the ceiling would collapse. When the shaking stopped, I looked at the front door and felt cold all over. A snaking line of black paint was crawling up from the floor and spreading across the door like a living stain. It covered the handles, the frame, everything, swallowing the exit. Seeing it move made my head ache instantly, like my brain didn't know how to process it. Jake stared at it too focused, like it was pulling his attention in. I shoved his shoulder. Hey, snap out of it. Let's prop the door open, I said. I grabbed the handles and pulled. The door didn't move. There was a wet, squishing sound, like someone pressing their hand into mud. Then the paint on the door bulged outward, forming the shape of a human face. Eyes opened. It looked at me. Fear shot through me, but right behind the fear was something else. Fascination, a pull, like my mind wanted to lean closer and understand it, like staring at it would answer questions I didn't even know how to ask. I took a step toward it without meaning to. A hand grabbed my shoulder and yanked me back so hard I fell onto my back. Jake crouched over me, eyes wide. None of that possession stuff. Don't look at it, breathing hard. The face on the door seemed to shift in the corner of my vision like it was smiling without a mouth. Jake grabbed my arm. Come on. Window. We found a window and stared out. It was black outside, not night black, not shadow black. It was like the world had been painted over. Jake picked up a brick from the floor. Here goes nothing. He threw it. The glass shattered, and for a second I felt relief. Then black paint poured through the window like a wave. Jake stared, furious and stunned. Are you kidding me? Let's find the other guys. Maybe they know how to break whatever this is. We moved deeper into the building, following a sound, muffled gasps, like someone choking or crying quietly. We found the source in the West Wing. Roger lay on the floor like someone had arranged him. He was cut open, torn apart in a way that didn't look like an accident. It looked deliberate. His chest and stomach were ripped so badly I couldn't even process it at first. And then I realized he was still alive, barely. We approached slowly. His eyes rolled toward us. He tried to speak. Gee, go, he rasped. Not safe, Nathan. Here, but something else. Then his body went still, and his eyes stayed open, empty of life. Jake's voice cracked. What the hell did that... I didn't answer because I didn't have one. My brain tried to make it make sense, and it couldn't. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging. I leaned toward Jake and whispered, "Did you bring the insurance?" We stared at each other for a second, because we both knew what that meant. The gun we kept for when jobs went sideways. Jake forced a pained smile. "Yeah, it's in the van." "Of course it is," I muttered. A gun didn't feel useful against living paint, but it felt better than nothing. "Come on," Jake said. "We can't stay here." We found another window. This one didn't have that unnatural blackness behind it. Instead, there was a dim, real twilight glow, like the outside world still existed on the other side. I grabbed a piece of rebar and swung. The glass shattered, and cool air spilled in. "Yes," I breathed. "That's it." I cleared the frame, pushing glass out until it looked big enough to squeeze through. I started to climb. Footsteps echoed again, closer now. I looked down the hallway and saw a figure emerging from a side room. As it walked, it made a horrible groaning, creaking sound, like old wood bending under too much weight, like a door hinge that should have been replaced years ago. Jake grabbed my ankle. "Move, move." I hauled myself up and froze. The wall outside the window wasn't a normal wall anymore. It was covered in faces, dozens of them pressed together like people trapped under ice. They stared at me with blank expressions that still somehow screamed pain. Then, all at once, they wailed. The sound hit me like a physical force. It felt like it went straight through my skull. I lost my grip and fell backward into the building. Pain shot through my side when I hit the floor, but it didn't matter. My ears rang so hard I couldn't think. The faces above me seemed to shift, and in my blurred panic, I swear they looked amused. Jake yanked me up. "Come on, come on." My hearing came back in pieces. We ran, not even sure where we were going, only sure we couldn't stop. Behind us, the figure moved slowly, dragging its misery through the halls. Black tendrils trailed behind it, painting the floor and walls as it walked, spreading the darkness like it was breathing it out. We reached a big double door, locked, barred, padlocked. No way through. Jake turned in panic. What now? I remembered 2 doors we'd passed. This way, it meant moving back toward the thing chasing us, but standing still meant dying. We ducked into a small office and shut the door. Inside were old filing cabinets and broken desks. We shoved ourselves under one of the desks, trying to breathe quietly. Minutes passed like hours. In a half-open drawer near my face, I saw something silver. I reached for it carefully. The drawer creaked softly, and Jake nearly jumped out of his skin. I pulled out a small locket. Inside were 2 photos of young women. Sisters, maybe. I flipped it over and read an engraving. "To Lily, my sister and my muse. Love, Sam." Jake whispered. "What is that?" "I don't know," I whispered back. "But the face, it feels familiar. Like I've seen it before. Just don't put it on. I'm not dealing with some ghost girlfriend situation tonight." I almost laughed, because what else do you do when everything is impossible? Then the doorknob rattled, the door creaked open slowly. A smell rolled into the room, rotten sweet, like something dead left too long in heat, mixed with fresh paint fumes so strong it burned my nose. I didn't want to look. I kept my eyes on the floor, on the dust, on the legs of the desk. Jake's eyes went wide. He stared at something past me. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. A black tendril of paint slid across the floor like a searching finger. It moved along the wall, climbed upward, and started shaping itself into a face. We were trapped. If that face finished forming and looked at us, I didn't know what would happen, but Mayhew's fear told me enough. I had a bad idea. It was the only idea. As the face took shape, I lunged out from under the desk and moved in front of it, trying to block where the eyes would be. I stumbled, knocking papers off a desk in the process. The sound echoed too loud in the small room. The footsteps shifted. Closer. I swallowed hard. If it was going to find us anyway, maybe I could buy time by doing something even riskier. I stood up and forced words out of my mouth. Nathan, wait. The footsteps stopped. In the dim light, I saw the figure properly for the first time. It looked like a middle-aged man. Bald head, thin beard, clothes smeared with paint. But his eyes weren't human. They were black pits full of swirling ink, like someone had poured the living paint into his skull and it had replaced whatever used to be there. It stood there, breathing in a broken, wet way. For one horrible second, I thought I'd made it angry enough to kill us immediately. Then it bent forward and retched. Black paint spilled from its mouth in thick, writhing streams, like the building itself was pouring out of him. When it raised its head again, it stared at me and spoke in a voice that didn't fit the man's body. You too, it rasped. More people Mayhew brought to destroy my work. Jake slowly stood up behind me, keeping his distance. You can't be allowed to live, the thing continued. You can't be allowed to do this. It lurched forward, and dark tendrils rolled off its arms like wet ropes. Wait, I said quickly. We were just hired, we didn't know. The tendrils lifted anyway. Desperate, I pulled the locket out and held it up. Is this yours? Is this you? Who are we talking to? The thing stopped again, like the object had grabbed its attention the way the door face had grabbed mine. Its voice softened just slightly. Where did you find that? I didn't answer fast enough, and it didn't wait. Yes, it said, almost like it hurt to admit. That was mine. My name was Samantha. Samantha Gardner. I stood frozen, listening, because somehow it felt like if I moved wrong, the room would snap back into violence. I worked here, Samantha said through Nathan's body. I sold paintings we made. My sister, Lily, and me. People loved them. This place used to feel happy. Then Mayhew bought it and started squeezing everyone. Raised rent, pushed out old vendors, took advantage of people who had nowhere else to go. Its hands clenched, and I heard something inside Nathan's arms crack, like bones under pressure. Worst of all, Samantha said, voice shaking with rage, what he did to the women here. Jake swallowed. He tried to speak anyway, like he couldn't help himself. Look, we only took this job because we needed money. If Mayhew's the problem, we're on your side. Let us go and we can take care of him for you. No reason to hurt us, right? For one second, hope sparked in me. Then Samantha shook Nathan's head slowly. No, she said. You're too valuable as vessels. The words hit me like ice. The others couldn't leave, she continued. This one is broken. I don't need to trust people who work for Mayhew when I can wear them. She stepped closer. Don't move, she said. It's less painful if you don't resist. Black paint poured from her mouth again, spraying forward. I yanked Jake backward just in time. The paint splashed where his shoulder had been. We ran. We burst out of the office and sprinted down the hall. The building looked worse now, like it had been feeding while we talked. Paint dripped from the ceiling in long strands, like oil. Faces formed in the walls in different states, some smooth and blank, some half-detailed, some twisted like they were mid-scream. Every surface looked alive. Behind us, the creaking footsteps followed. We ran through the main hall, and I understood what Mayhew meant about transformation. The art wasn't just spreading. It was becoming something. A moving collection of trapped people, or trapped memories, or trapped souls. I didn't know which was worse. We need a way out, Jake panted. I felt my pocket and realized my hands were shaking. Then I thought of something Mayhew had said like it was nothing. The paint thinner. I grabbed Jake's arm. Do you have your lighter? He blinked at me like I was insane. Yeah, why? If this whole place is basically one giant painting, I said, forcing the idea into words, and it's holding us in, then maybe fire breaks it. There's gallons of paint thinner. We can burn a hole through whatever this is. Jake's fear turned into a wild, desperate grin. That's stupid. Dangerous. And it might work. The thinner was where Mayhew said it would be. Big containers lined up like someone had been waiting for the worst day of their life. The front door was still covered in shifting black paint, faces twitching in and out like they were trying to speak. Throw some, I yelled. Jake grabbed a container and splashed thinner across the door. He kept his eyes mostly shut, like a kid afraid of a scary movie. And I couldn't blame him. Back up, I shouted. He stumbled away. I flicked the lighter, watching the flame dance in my shaking hand. For 1 second, I hesitated, because fire doesn't care who it saves and who it kills. Then I threw it. The thinner caught fast. A burst of flame rolled across the door, and the faces warped, melting away like wax. The smell was awful. Burning paint, burning wood, something else underneath that smelled like hair and old meat. But the door began to give. Jake coughed, eyes watering. Now we just have to get out of a burning building. I let out a short laugh that didn't sound like me. Yeah? Great plan. A scream ripped through the hall, loud enough that it felt like it shook the air itself. Samantha, still wearing Nathan's body, rose up as if lifted by a wave of living paint. Her voice boomed through the crackling fire. You pathetic savages, she screamed. What have you done? My work, my life. You'll burn it all down. There will be no justice, no future, no more art. If Mayhew really killed her, if she was trapped like this, if her whole existence had become a curse and a prison, then her face twisted with pure hatred, and the tendrils surged forward like arms reaching for us. Pity vanished. Go, I shouted. Jake nodded, and we both kicked at the burning door together. It splintered and crashed open. We fell out into cold night air, gasping like we'd been underwater. We scrambled away from the entrance, watching flames crawl up the building's front. Inside, the wailing continued, but it couldn't push through the fire. Not yet. As the building burned, the black paint outside began to dry and fade. Even the tendrils near the white ring withered, shrinking like worms hit with salt. Jake stared at it, stunned. Should we call 911? I listened to the screams from inside, the sound of something dying that might not even be alive. No, I said quietly. Let it burn a bit. We sat on the ground, breathing hard, watching the flames. Part of me expected the paint to surge out like a tidal wave and swallow the parking lot. But it didn't. It just burned. Then headlights swept across the lot. Mayhew's Oldsmobile pulled in fast. He got out, and the look on his face wasn't surprise. It was panic. No, he said, voice breaking. No, my building. What happened? He stomped toward us, angry now, like we'd keyed his car instead of surviving a nightmare. Jake started to rise, ready to fight. I held a hand out to stop him and spoke first. I'm guessing you left out a few details, I said. Like the part where the ghost of an artist you murdered tries to turn people into meat puppets made of paint. He looked offended that I said it so plainly, and I'm guessing you thought we'd die in there like the others. I continued. What was that insurance setup? Was it worth it? How much were you going to make when we didn't come home? Mayhew's face hardened. No, it's not like that. He started to say more, then caught himself. The job needed to be done. To keep the business safe. The money covered expenses. It's not my fault they couldn't follow instructions. Jake had heard enough. He punched Mayhew in the face so hard Mayhew stumbled and fell to one knee. Blood ran from his nose immediately. Jake stepped forward like he was going to do it again. Then Mayhew pulled a gun. Everything froze. Mayhew looked up, eyes full of hate. "I ought to kill you for that," he said, voice shaking with anger. But first responders might be on the way, and it wouldn't look good. He glanced at the burning building and then slowly smiled like he'd just solved a problem. "Looks like the fire contained it. Never tried that before. Didn't want to risk letting it out. But now," he spread his hands a little. "Now, I think it's gone." He pointed the gun loosely in our direction anyway. "So I'll let you leave. But if you say a word about any of this, I swear I will." "Yeah," I cut in. "Yeah, we won't." I grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him back before he did something that got us shot. As we backed away, I spat the words I'd been holding in. "Go to hell." He lowered the gun and shoved it away like he was putting away a tool. Then he muttered something about lawyers, got into his Oldsmobile, and started to drive off. Jake yanked his arm free from my grip. "We're just letting him go? He's a murderer." I felt a strange warmth in my pocket, like a coin heating up in the sun. I reached in and pulled out the silver locket. I looked at it for a moment, then closed it in my fist. "No," I said. "We're not." Jake stared at me, confused, as I bent down and picked up a small scrap of paper from the ground near our feet, something that must have blown out of the building during the chaos. One side was smeared with dried black paint. I wrapped the scrap around the locket. The metal felt heavier, like it had picked up a charge. Then I ran. I moved fast, catching up to the Oldsmobile as it rolled toward the lot's exit. I reached the trunk and slid the wrapped locket into a seam near the edge, wedging it in just before Mayhew's car picked up speed. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Jake ran up to me. "What did you just do?" I just pointed. For a second, nothing happened. Then thin black lines began to leak from Mayhew's trunk, crawling outward in branching streaks like cracks in ice. Jake's eyes went wide. "Oh, wow, yeah, that's gonna be a reunion." Down the road, in the distance, we heard a crash, then gunshots, then a scream that ended too quickly. Jake and I stood there for a long moment, watching the building burn behind us and the night swallow the road ahead. After a while, Jake cleared his throat like he was trying to force life back into something normal. "Do you think we could get real jobs as painters?" he asked. I looked at him. He shrugged. "Just to try it?" I thought about the faces in the walls, the screaming window, the door that looked at me, the way my mind almost leaned forward into it like a kiss. Then Jake chuckled. "Nah. Something else next. Painting sucks." Story 3. I tried. I really tried. I never wanted to be a parent. I didn't dream about it, didn't plan for it. But when it happens to you, when a kid is suddenly yours and the world expects you to figure it out, there's this strange moment where you realize you don't get to be halfway in. You either run or you stay and become someone new. I stayed. And no matter what people say, it is hard not to fall in love with it. Not with every single part of it. Not with the stress, or the fear, or the responsibility that sits on your shoulders the second you realize another life depends on you. But with the kid. With the tiny person who looks at you like you're the safest thing in the world. Parenthood has good days and bad days. It has days where you feel proud and days where you feel like a failure. But through all of it, you learn your child in a way that's hard to explain to people who don't have one. You learn their habits, their moods, their little tells. You learn what their silence means. You learn when they're lying and when they're scared. You learn them the way you learn your own face in the mirror. And you love them almost automatically. Like they're not just someone living in your house, but something that came from you, an extension of you. A piece of you walking around outside your body. You tell yourself you can guide them, shape them, help them become better than you were. That's the story we all sell ourselves anyway. But kids aren't clay. People aren't simple. You can do everything you think is right and still watch them turn into someone you don't recognize. You tell them to go left, and they go right. You tell them to slow down, and they speed up. You tell them to be kind, and they find new ways to be cruel that you never even considered. Life has a way of reminding you that love doesn't come with control. Still, even with the arguments and the headbutting and the moments where you both slam doors and refuse to speak, you can raise a kid. You can bring them up right. That's what I believed. That's what I told myself I was doing. My son, for most of his life, looked like proof that I had done it right. He was polite. He knew how to shake a hand. He said, "Yes, ma'am," without being asked. Teachers called him respectful. Other parents called him a good influence. I used to hear that and feel my chest fill up with something warm, like maybe I had broken the cycle, like maybe I had actually managed to build something good out of a situation I never wanted. And once he hit his teenage years, it became clear he had a charm that I didn't have at his age. God, that boy could talk to girls. When high school started, it was like every couple of weeks there was a new story. He'd come home with a grin and lean against the kitchen counter while I ate dinner, telling me about his new love. He'd talk like it was serious, like he'd finally found the one person who understood him, and he'd say it with that teenage confidence that makes everything sound permanent. He was 15. 15-year-olds fall in love the way they pick favorite songs. Hard, fast, and with absolute certainty, they'll never like anything else again. Who was I to tell him it wasn't real? Who was I to roll my eyes and crush whatever hope he'd managed to find in the middle of that messy age? And it all seemed harmless. His little relationship stayed at school. Cafeteria dates, holding hands in the hallway, the kind of innocent drama that feels like the end of the world when you're a kid and like nothing when you're older. Back then, it didn't worry me. By the time he was 17, things changed. He started bringing girls to the house. Not just one, either. Different girls, different faces. He'd tell us he wanted them to meet us, wanted to have dinner together like it meant something. His mother would put extra effort into cooking. I'd clean up the living room and try to look friendly instead of suspicious. I've never been great with names. I'll admit that. You tell me someone's name once and it slides right off my brain. But faces? Faces stick with me. I remember the shape of a smile. I remember eyes. I remember the way someone holds themselves, the way they sit at a table, the way their laugh sounds when it catches them off guard. So I noticed the girls, even when I couldn't remember what my son called them the first time he introduced them. And then I started noticing something else, missing person flyers. At first, they were just background noise, the kind of thing you see on telephone poles and bulletin boards, and try not to stare at too long. Our town wasn't a big city, but it wasn't some untouched small-town paradise either. People went missing sometimes. Runaways, custody fights, bad choices, accidents. It happens. That's what I told myself, but then I saw faces I recognized. Not at first in a clear way. More like a flicker, a little mental alarm bell that made me look twice. A girl with dark hair and a wide smile. A girl with braces. A girl who looked like she'd been nervous at our dinner table, twisting her napkin in her hands while my son talked over her. I'd stand there in front of a pole or a board, staring at the flyer, and for a second I'd feel my brain try to connect it to something safer. I'd tell myself it was coincidence. I'd tell myself I was mixing people up. I'd tell myself that just because a girl looked familiar didn't mean she was the same girl who had been in my house. Because this was my son, my kid, the boy I'd raised while I was still basically a kid myself. I was 16 when he was born. 16. I didn't have the money, the patience, or the maturity people are supposed to have before they become parents. I learned on the job. I worked whatever I could get. I missed out on a lot, and I told myself it was worth it because I was building a better life for him. We grew up together. That's what I used to say when people asked how I managed. Like it was some sweet story, like it made everything stronger. And because of that, because of everything I'd sacrificed, I couldn't make myself believe he could be something terrible. Not really. Not deep down. But denial has a limit. It always does. The day I saw Miranda's name on a missing person flyer, something in me went cold. Miranda was the most recent girl my son had brought home. I remembered her clearly, even if I'd had to replay the dinner in my mind to pull her name up. She'd been pretty in a quiet way, not loud or flashy. She'd laughed at my wife's jokes. She'd helped clear plates without being asked. She'd looked at my son like she trusted him completely. Now her face was printed on paper, her smile frozen under the words, missing. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I stood there staring at the flyer longer than I should have, long enough that a stranger walking by slowed down and looked at me like I was in the way. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I felt like if I kept staring long enough, the ink would change into a different face, a different name, a different reality. It didn't. That was the moment I knew I had to talk to my son. Not later. Not after I calmed down. Not after I found a way to make it less painful. I had to talk to him because if I didn't, the thoughts would keep growing in the dark parts of my mind until they were all I could see. I begged God to let me be wrong. I prayed in the car. I prayed in the shower. I prayed while staring at the ceiling at night, bargaining like a desperate person even though I hadn't bargained for anything in years. Please, let there be an explanation. Let it be a misunderstanding. Let her have run away. Let the flyer be old. Let my memory be wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more the dots started lining up. None of those girls had ever visited more than once or twice. That alone didn't prove anything. Teenagers move on fast, and most high school relationships are basically smoke. But then I remembered something else. I had caught my son sneaking out at night more than once. The first time I caught him, he told me he was going to meet a friend. He acted annoyed that I'd even asked, like I was being controlling. The second time, he said he couldn't sleep and needed to go for a walk. The third time, he didn't even try to make an excuse. He just stared at me with those flat eyes and said, "I'm almost an adult." Those eyes bothered me more than his words. Sometimes when he interacted with those girls, he looked empty, hollow, like he was watching a scene play out instead of being part of it. He'd smile at them and touch their hands and say all the right things, but there was something missing in it, something I couldn't name, but I could feel. And when he talked about them afterward, when it was just him and me, he sounded different. He wasn't excited the way teenage boys usually are. It wasn't awkward, giggly, nervous excitement. It wasn't even the bragging kind. It felt focused, like he was describing something he wanted, not someone he cared about. Like he was building a fantasy in his head, and the girl was just a prop in it. I hated myself for thinking that. I hated myself for letting my mind go there. But once a thought like that enters you, it doesn't leave quietly. That night, after a long day at the office, I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel. Traffic lights blurred. Horns sounded too loud. My heartbeat felt uneven, like it was trying to warn me. When I got home, I didn't even take my shoes off properly. I barely said hello to my wife. I told her I needed to talk to him, that I'd handle it, and I headed upstairs before she could ask questions. I didn't knock. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to give him time to hide something. Maybe I didn't want to hear him say, "Come in," like everything was normal. I pushed his door open. His room was empty. The bed was made, but not neatly. The curtains were half closed, letting in a slice of late afternoon light. It smelled like deodorant and laundry detergent and the faint sourness of teenage sweat. His phone wasn't on the charger. His shoes weren't by the door. For a second, the emptiness felt like an answer in itself. Then I saw the nightstand. On top of it was a stack of paper, folded with care like someone had taken the time to do it right. I walked over and unfolded the first one. A missing person flyer. A teenage girl's face stared up at me from the page. Under it was the same kind of description they always put. Age, height, last seen wearing, contact number, please call if you have information. I unfolded another and another. Each one had a different face, different hair, different smile, but I recognized them. Not all of them right away, but enough. Girls who had sat at my table. Girls who had laughed in my living room. Girls my son had introduced with casual confidence, as if they were nothing more than a passing phase. My stomach turned. I remember thinking for one brief, desperate second that I could still explain it away. Maybe he'd been helping put them up. Maybe he'd grabbed extras from somewhere. Maybe he meant well and didn't know what else to do. Then I saw the writing. Across each flyer, someone had scrawled words in thick, angry strokes. The handwriting was familiar in a way that made my skin crawl, because it was the handwriting I had watched form over years. The handwriting I'd helped him practice when he was small, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil gripped too tight. The first one said, too loud. The second, too demanding. Another, too arrogant. Another, too annoying. There were more, 7 in total, each flyer marked like it was being reviewed. Like the girls weren't missing people, but failed attempts. Like they were products he'd tried and returned. I sifted through them with shaking hands, my breathing shallow. A part of me was still trying to reject it, still trying to force my mind into a story that didn't include what was right in front of me. But another part of me, something darker and quieter, felt an awful kind of clarity. A tear slid down my face. It surprised me not because I didn't expect to cry, but because I couldn't tell what the tear meant. Horror, grief, shock. Maybe all of it at once. Then something happened that made it worse. As I stood there with the flyers spread across the nightstand, I felt my mouth pull upward. A smile. Not a big smile, not a laugh. Just the corners of my mouth rising like my face had decided on its own. It felt wrong. It felt disconnected from the rest of me. It felt like I was watching myself from far away. I don't know how long I stood like that. Seconds, maybe. Maybe a full minute. Time does strange things when your mind is trying to protect you from what you've learned. I must have been completely lost in it, because I didn't even hear the bedroom door open behind me. The only thing I remember clearly is a quiet voice, almost careful, saying, "Dad?" I turned. My son stood in the doorway, looking at me the way he always did when he came home late and thought he might be caught. Not guilty, not scared, just measuring, watching to see what I knew, what I'd do, how much trouble he was in. I should have yelled. I should have demanded answers. I should have called the police right then. I should have grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom and screamed for my wife to get out of the house. But I didn't. Emotion flooded me so fast it blurred everything else. Not just fear and confusion, but something else too. Something I don't like admitting even to myself. Something proud and warm and deeply, horribly wrong. I dropped the flyers onto the nightstand like they were nothing, like they didn't matter, like they weren't evidence of something that should have shattered my entire world. I stepped toward him, arms opening automatically, the way they had when he was a child and scraped his knee, the way they had when he came home crying after a fight with a friend, the way they had the first time he'd asked me if I was proud of him. And the words that came out of my mouth, the only words I could think to say, were soft and certain. That's my boy. Story 4. My neighbor is unusual. That sounds harsh, and I know it. He doesn't yell at anyone. He doesn't blast music at night. He doesn't park his car in the wrong spot. He mostly keeps to himself and doesn't bother anybody. Still, from the first time I noticed him, he made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't one clear thing. It was more like a collection of little details that didn't add up to anything I could accuse him of, yet somehow added up to a feeling I couldn't shake. His house always looked lived in, but I never saw him leave. His lights were on at odd hours. He seemed to be home every time I looked, day or night. If someone told me he had agoraphobia, I would have nodded and said, sure, that makes sense. Except it didn't quite make sense. Not with him. The distance between our houses is part of why I didn't think much about it at first. He isn't next door. He lives about 3 miles away as the roads go, and our neighborhood is spread out with a lot of trees, slopes, and pockets of space between properties. It's one of those places where you can be neighbors and still never run into each other at the grocery store. During the pandemic, when everything shut down and the days started blending together, I found myself alone in my house for long stretches of time. Not alone in the dramatic way you see in movies, just alone in the quiet, routine way that makes you start noticing things you used to ignore. The silence had weight to it. You'd wake up, and the whole day would be the same 4 walls, unless you forced yourself to do something different. That's when I revived an old hobby. Bird watching. I ordered a pair of powerful binoculars online, the kind that makes you feel a little ridiculous at first because they look like something you'd take on a safari. When they arrived, I spent hours on my deck watching my backyard like it was a nature documentary. It helped. It gave my brain something to do that wasn't doom scrolling or staring at the news. The birds became familiar, like cast members in a show. There was constant drama between the scrub jays and the Stellar's jays. The scrub jays were loud and bossy, always acting like they owned the feeder. The Stellar's jays would show up like they were too elegant to be involved, then immediately pick fights anyway. The robins kept to the shadier parts of the yard where the soil stayed softer, tilting their heads and hopping around while they hunted for worms. Tiny songbirds, finches, chickadees, whatever else wandered through, ate from the feeder I kept on the deck floor, tucked slightly under a table so the rain wouldn't soak it. On good days, I'd sit out there with coffee and let time disappear. On bad days, I'd still sit out there because at least watching a bird scratch at the ground was better than thinking about what was happening in the world. One afternoon, I was tracking a bird through the binoculars, following it as it hopped from branch to branch, when I lowered the view slightly and accidentally landed on a person instead. A man stood on a deck across the way. Not right across several properties, with trees and rooftops layered in between, but visible because of the way the hills were shaped. Both our houses sat on slight rises, and from my deck, you can look out and see down across a few different backyards like they're arranged on steps. He was watering potted plants. That was all. He had a watering can in his hand, and he moved from pot to pot with the slow patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed it. The strange part was his expression. He was smiling, not the tight smile people wear when they're trying to be polite, but a relaxed, pleased smile as if watering plants was the highlight of his day. He looked about my dad's age. Gray hair, a little shaggy, baggy pants, flannel shirt, the kind of outfit you'd expect on someone who chops wood and drinks black coffee, even if they've never chopped wood in their life. For a minute, seeing him like that made me feel silly about my earlier unease. He just looked like a normal older guy, enjoying his garden. I watched him for a few seconds longer than I meant to, then moved my binoculars away and went back to birds. For a while, I didn't think about him. Then, one evening, I was outside on my deck with a cocktail. The sky was darkening, and the neighborhood had that calm twilight feel where everything is quiet but not fully asleep. I wasn't doing anything unusual, just standing out there letting the cool air hit my face, trying to pretend life was normal. I happened to glance toward that same direction at exactly the right moment, and saw a brilliant flash of light coming from his house. It was teal, not white like a camera flash, not yellow like a porch light, not blue like a TV. Teal, bright and concentrated like a burst of colored lightning inside a room. I stood there staring, glass in my hand, waiting for it to happen again. In the darkness of the neighborhood, I couldn't make out much more than the outline of rooftops and trees, but that flash had been bright enough to cut through everything. What makes a teal flash of light? I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe someone had a bright LED sign. Maybe it was a weird reflection. Maybe it was a kid's toy. But none of those explanations felt right. The light had been too clean and too sudden, like it came from something deliberate. 2 days later, Amazon delivered a telescope. I told myself it was for stargazing, and that wasn't a lie. I do like looking at the stars, but I also knew what I was really going to do with it. I wanted a better look at that house. I wanted to satisfy the curiosity that had settled in my mind like a splinter. I set it up on my deck and tested it on the moon first, because that felt harmless and normal. Then I swung it slowly across the neighborhood, past the trees and rooftops, until I found the spot where I'd seen the flash. I started checking on him the way people check on a TV show they claim not to care about. Sometimes I'd look and he'd be out on his deck, moving around in a way that looked almost playful. Once I saw him dancing, not well, but with energy, like he didn't care how he looked. He'd sway and step and throw his arms out. His face would split into that same easy smile. Sometimes he'd sing along to something, though I couldn't hear a word. I could just see his mouth moving and the way his chest lifted, the way he acted like he was in his own little world. And he always seemed happy. That was one of the strangest parts. In a time when everyone I knew was stressed and tired and tense, he looked genuinely content, like nothing could touch him. At some point, I started calling him Gerald. It was stupid, but it made sense in my head. He reminded me, just slightly in a way I can't fully explain, of my sister's dog, Gerald. Not in appearance, obviously. More in the vibe. Something about his cheerful, self-contained energy. Gerald the dog had been a great dog, and I didn't mean it as an insult. The name just popped into my mind and stuck. I'd catch myself thinking, I wonder what Gerald's up to today. Or, I haven't seen Gerald all week. When I told my sister about it on a phone call, she immediately took it the wrong way. So you've got a crush on your mysterious neighbor, she said, sounding way too entertained. No, I told her. He's just a guy I can see from my deck. I don't know anything about him. And he's old, like Dad. She laughed. Oh, so it's a daddy syndrome romance. There is no romance. What can't you understand about that? I snapped, and she laughed even harder because she's the kind of person who enjoys being annoying when she knows she's getting a reaction. After that, I stopped telling her updates because it wasn't worth the teasing. Besides, I wasn't watching him because I liked him. I was watching him because I couldn't figure him out. Then I saw the teal flash again. This time I was ready. I turned off my own outdoor light so nothing would reflect off the telescope lens, and I aimed it carefully at his house. I adjusted the focus until the edges sharpened, and I realized something that made me feel both guilty and shocked. I could see inside. I don't know why I hadn't expected that. Maybe because a telescope feels like it should be for distant objects, like stars and planets, not someone's living room. But there it was, a window, curtains not fully closed, and a view into part of his house that was lit from within. My first instinct was to pull back, to tell myself I'd gone too far. But my hands didn't move. I just stared, frozen by the weirdness of what I was seeing. His setup didn't look like a normal home office. It looked advanced, expensive, and professional. 3 extra-large screens were arranged in a way that made it feel like a control center. There were cables, neat bundles of them, and equipment I didn't recognize. Then I noticed something else, set off to one side. It was black, about 5 feet tall, rectangular, standing upright on legs. Tiny lights blinked on it in a pattern that didn't feel random, like it was communicating with something. I had no idea what it was. It wasn't a speaker. It wasn't a normal tower PC. It looked like a piece of lab equipment that had wandered into a suburban home by mistake. As I stared, movement drew my attention. There were other men in the room with him, at least 3, maybe 4. Crowding around the screens, they stood close together, leaning forward like they were watching something incredible. 2 of them rubbed their chins, the way people do when they're trying to understand something complicated, or when they're impressed by what they're seeing. I leaned closer to the eyepiece without thinking, like getting physically closer would somehow help me make sense of it. And then all of them turned at once and looked directly toward me. It was so sudden and synchronized that my throat tightened. I couldn't believe it. There was no way they could see me. It was dark outside. I was 3 miles away. I was on a deck with the lights off, standing behind a telescope. What were the odds they even knew someone could see into that window? Yet they all stared in my direction like I'd just walked into the room. Panic hit me in a wave. I went perfectly still. I didn't step back. I didn't jerk the telescope away. I didn't even breathe properly. My brain decided the best strategy was to become invisible by not moving, which is ridiculous. But fear doesn't care about logic. I waited them out. After about 45 seconds, they turned back to the screens like nothing happened. But I didn't feel relief. I felt exposed. Like I had just been caught doing something I couldn't explain, by people who didn't look confused or surprised. They looked calm, like they'd expected it. I backed away from the telescope and went inside, locking my back door even though it was already locked. That night I kept checking my windows, listening for a car pulling into my driveway, for footsteps on the porch. Nothing happened. The next day, in the late afternoon, I stepped onto my deck with a mug of tea and glanced toward his house, without even thinking about it. Gerald was outside, leaning on his railing. Both forearms were resting on it, and he was tipped forward slightly, looking directly at me. It wasn't the casual look of a person who happens to face that direction. It was deliberate. It was like he'd been waiting for me to come out. My stomach dropped. For a second, I considered going back inside, pretending I hadn't seen him. But a different part of me got angry, like I'd been embarrassed and needed to regain control of the situation. What the hell? I thought. I lifted my hand and waved. Gerald smiled wider and waved back, slow and friendly, like we were old neighbors who'd been waving at each other for years. That should have made me feel better. It did the opposite. That evening, I went out on the deck again with my usual cocktail. I put on my headphones and played music, trying to relax like I always did. I remember it clearly because I was listening to a Jack White song, one with a strong beat that normally drowns out everything else. Halfway through the track, a man's voice came through my headphones. "Hello there, neighbor." Lovely evening, isn't it? I sat bolt upright so fast my drink nearly sloshed over the rim. My hands flew to the sides of my head, and I ripped the headphones off. The music stopped abruptly. The air went quiet again, the normal outdoor quiet of nighttime. I stared across the dark yards toward Gerald's house. He was standing on his deck. He smiled and lifted his hand in another wave. Every hair on my arms felt like it was standing up. My mind tried to run through explanations at high speed, and none of them worked. My headphones were not connected to anything except my phone. No one should have been able to talk through them. It wasn't a walkie-talkie. It wasn't a baby monitor. It wasn't a speaker I left on by accident. Was he really talking to me through my own headphones? I didn't know what to do. I actually looked around my deck like there might be someone else there, some prankster hiding behind a chair. The idea was ridiculous, but my brain wanted it to be ridiculous. It wanted an answer that didn't change how the world worked. Gerald kept smiling, patient and pleasant, like he was waiting for me to respond. I made a small, uncertain wave back, more out of shock than choice. Then, because I apparently make terrible decisions when I'm scared, I put the headphones back on. His voice came through again immediately, clear as if he were standing right beside me. "Would you like to see something?" My mouth went dry. I turned my head slightly, still staring at him across the distance. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just sat there, frozen, trying to figure out if I was about to witness a trick or something much worse. Gerald raised his hands in front of his chest. Teal-colored sparks appeared at his fingertips. They weren't like a lighter or a sparkler. They didn't smoke. They didn't flicker the way normal fire does. They looked clean and sharp, like tiny pieces of colored electricity. The sparks gathered, grew brighter, and began to shift in color. Teal into green, then into something almost blue, then back again, like a living light show. Sparks arched from the fingertips of one hand to the fingertips of the other. He moved his hands closer together, then farther apart, and the arcing sparks stretched and compressed as if he were pulling on invisible wires. Then the space between his hands filled with a shape. At first, it was a geometric pattern, lines and angles forming a design that looked too precise to be random. It reminded me of those patterns you see in math textbooks or on sci-fi interfaces. Gerald held it steady, smiling like an artist showing off a sketch. The shape shifted. It became the image of a scrub jay, perfectly formed and light. The bird's outline shimmered, and for a moment it looked like it might flap its wings. Then it changed into a hummingbird, the delicate body and long beak clearly recognizable. Then a flower, petals opening, as if it were blooming in real time. I sat there staring, barely breathing. Then the design changed again. It became my face. Not a generic face, not a simple outline. Mine, the shape of my jaw, the curve of my nose, the way my hair frames my forehead, a light-made portrait held between his hands like a hovering hologram. Without thinking, I reached up and touched my cheek. Across the distance, Gerald's light image copied the motion at the exact same time, like he was mirroring me through the thing he held. It wasn't just showing my face, it was responding to me. My heart was beating so hard it made me feel slightly nauseated. Gerald kept smiling warmly, like he wasn't doing anything threatening, like he was just sharing a hobby, like a neighbor showing another neighbor a new trick he learned. Then, as casually as someone finishing a conversation, he let the sparks die down. The light faded into nothing. Gerald tipped his hat, an old gesture that felt strangely formal, and went back inside his house. I sat on my deck for a long time after that, headphones still on, but silent now. My drink had gone warm. My hands were shaking. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mind racing in circles. I told myself it had to be some kind of technology, a projection, a drone, a laser, anything that fit inside the normal rules of reality. But none of my explanations held up. Not with the voice in my headphones. Not with the way those men had looked straight at me the night I watched through the telescope. Not with the way the light had shifted into living images like it understood what it was doing. At around 3 a.m, I found myself making lists in my head like I could plan my way out of fear. I'm getting cameras, I thought. I'm getting a parabolic microphone. I'm getting whatever spy gear exists that normal people are allowed to buy. If he can reach into my headphones, I need to know how. If he can see me from that distance, I need to know how. I wasn't thinking about calling the police because, what would I say? My neighbor shot teal sparks from his fingers and talked through my headphones? I could picture the expression on the operator's face, even through the phone. I could picture the polite questions that would end with someone suggesting I take a deep breath and maybe get some sleep. In the morning, after what felt like no sleep at all, I made coffee and carried the mug out to my deck like I always did. The normal routine felt important, like if I did ordinary things, maybe the world would snap back into place. I took one sip, then looked up toward Gerald's house. It wasn't there. At first, I thought I was still half asleep. I blinked hard and looked again. I even lifted my binoculars with shaking hands and focused on the spot. There was no house, no deck, no windows, no flower pots, no railing where he'd leaned the day before, no sign of damage, no smoking ruins, no fire trucks, no rubble, not even a cleared lot like someone had demolished it. It was as if the property had always been empty, as if my memory had been built around a blank space. My stomach rolled. I lowered the binoculars and stared, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were telling it. The landscape looked wrong without his house there, like a tooth missing from a smile. I could see trees and a stretch of ground, but not the structure I'd been watching for weeks. I stood there until my coffee went cold. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't know who would understand. My sister would laugh and ask me what I'd been drinking. My friends would try to be supportive in that way people are when they think you're having a bad mental health week. And if I told anyone official, I'd be risking something worse than embarrassment. I'd be inviting people to decide I wasn't reliable. The scariest thought wasn't even that Gerald wasn't real. It was that he might have been real, and he could leave whenever he wanted. And that meant he could come back just as easily. I keep replaying it, trying to find the point where it went from normal to impossible. Was it the teal flash? Was it the men who looked at me like they could see through darkness and distance? Was it the voice in my headphones? Or was it earlier than that? Something I missed because I wasn't looking closely enough. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what category it belongs in. Technology doesn't explain it, but neither does anything else I can name without sounding insane. So I'm posting this here because I don't have any better option. Has anyone experienced something like this? Does anyone know what this could be? Am I losing my mind, or is there a real explanation I haven't considered yet? I haven't left my house in a week, and I can feel how that's messing with me. So I'm asking for help while I still feel like myself. Please be kind in your comments. Any advice is appreciated. Story 5. In our world, there are creatures that are older than the pyramids, older than the stone the pyramids are made from. They are not animals in the usual sense, and they are not gods in the way people like to imagine gods. They are patterns. They are the first shapes life copies itself from, the deep outlines that living things fall into again and again. You could call them archetypes, because that is what they are. The templates that sit behind instinct, behavior, hunger, love, fear, and the need to survive. The first of these beings was simple, almost empty of thought. It was more like a moving force than a mind. It carried only the most basic drive: stay alive, make more of yourself, keep the line going. But time doesn't stay still, and life doesn't stay simple. As Earth changed and living things adapted, more archetypes appeared. Each new one carried something extra: a new hunger, a new skill, a new kind of desire. There are many of them, more than anyone could name, but 3 matter here: the wolf, the swan, and what would later be reflected in the Australopiths, ancient relatives of us, early apes learning to become something else. The world in those days was wide and green. Africa held long plains where grass rolled like waves, and forests thick enough to swallow sound. Smaller creatures lived and died in the open, pulled through a hard cycle that never ended. Predators chased prey. Prey tore at plants. Plants fed on what was left behind. Everything ate, everything was eaten, and nothing apologized for it. That violence was normal for animals, because animals had to take from the world to stay alive. The archetypes did not. They had no bodies to feed, no stomachs to fill, no nests to defend. They moved through the world without needing anything from it. The world was a stage they could watch, but not truly touch. They were present, but separate. At some point, no one can say when, because time moves differently for beings like them. The wolf and the swan traveled together to the old plains of Africa. They had heard a kind of rumor the way great spirits pass information. The eight kin were coming down from the trees. When a creature changes its way of surviving in a major way, something new often appears in the realm of archetypes. A shift in life can summon a shift in the patterns behind life. The wolf moved with quiet purpose, eyes always scanning. The swan followed with a different energy, gliding and circling, curious and restless. She liked news. She liked newness. She liked having something to take back and repeat. The grass that day was the color of amber, and the wind turned it into spirals and ripples. In the middle of that field, the wolf stopped. It had seen many births of many archetypes before. Usually, they were subtle, a pressure in the air, a shape that slowly became clearer. But what stood ahead was strange enough that even the wolf hesitated. There, in the center of a wide circle of flattened grass, was a silhouette forming out of nothing. The plants around it looked pressed down as if a heavy weight had sat there. Inside the dark outline, a crimson light pulsed, brightening and dimming like a heartbeat. And the silhouette had two heads. The swan tilted her own head in a sharp, bird-like motion, one beady eye fixed on the wolf's amber gaze, as if asking, "Do you see this?" The wolf's stare stayed flat and still. It did not answer in any way the swan could read. The swan watched a moment longer, then lost patience. The birth was slow, and she had little tolerance for anything that didn't change quickly. She lifted into the air and flew off, already thinking about what she would tell the other great spirits, already imagining the reaction her gossip would get. The wolf remained. It stood and watched as that two-headed outline continued to take shape, and the watching was not a short thing. For the wolf, it lasted 1,000,000 years, because that is how long it took for what was forming there to become clear. The spirit that was being born did not hurry. It built itself like a careful idea becoming real. At first, there were only hints, a thickening in the air, a stronger pulse of crimson light. Then the shape became more detailed. Two bodies, close together, sharing the same space, joined in a way the wolf had never seen. The swan, somewhere far away, had long stopped caring. She was busy with her own line of descendants, busy counting eggs and guarding them and watching herself repeat through the ages. The wolf, however, stayed close, because it was beginning to understand that this was not just a new archetype. This was a new kind of rule. The hands were the first part that truly formed. Two sets of fingers appeared, interlocked. They tightened gently, testing warmth and pressure, as if confirming that the other was real. That simple touch struck the wolf like a foreign language. Its own descendants, wolves made of flesh, would someday know loyalty, pack bonds, care for pups. But the wolf archetype itself had never had that. All archetypes were born alone. They were singular forces. They did not hold hands. They did not seek comfort. They did not share. The more the figure formed, the more the wolf felt something it didn't have a good name for. Not hunger, not fear. Something hotter and sharper. It wasn't until the forming was nearly complete that the wolf accepted what it had been suspecting since the beginning. The one being born was two bodies, distinct yet joined by choice, not stuck together like a mistake, not fused like a wound. They were separate, and they stayed close because they wanted to. They were inseparable through will. Their eyes, still half-made, still shimmering with that inner crimson, locked on each other with a kind of focus that looked endless. His emerald gaze held her as if the rest of existence was background. Her own eyes, like jewels not yet cut, held him the same way. Two halves of one whole, born already seeking each other. The wolf felt envy move through it like fire. It followed them when they began to walk the plains. They moved without urgency, exploring together. The world opened in front of them, grassland, forest edge, river full of life and struggle. Yet the two did not eat, did not hunt, did not gather. Like the archetypes, they had no need. They simply went. Sometimes he stepped ahead and guided. Sometimes she did. But always their hands found each other again. Always they adjusted their pace without thinking. So neither was left behind. Their companionship was so steady it felt like a law. For millennia, contentment ruled them. They had each other, and that seemed to be enough. The wolf watched, unable to look away, as if staring long enough might reveal how it worked. It did not. Then ambition arrived like a storm cloud. It didn't come from outside them. It rose from within him. A restlessness appeared in the way he looked at the horizon, in the way his steps slowed as if his mind was turning over a new thought. Wandering was no longer enough. He wanted more than movement. He wanted reach. He wanted to put a hand on the world itself, to take hold of it, to shape it, and to offer it to her like a gift. Once that desire took root, it grew fast. Together, they started to study things they had once only passed by. They knelt near plants, staring at leaves, stems, sap. They watched insects crawl and lift and carry. They listened to birds, watched animals tear at each other, watched the cycle of teeth and blood and survival with a careful new attention. They were searching for a way in, a way to affect what had always been out of reach. They looked beyond their own kind, beyond archetypes, beyond spirits. They searched the world as if the world were a locked door and they were trying to find the key. After another 10,000 years of wandering and searching, they found something that didn't belong. It was a stone, crimson red, shining from within as if it held a coal at its center. It lay half buried near the mouth of a shallow ravine, and even from a distance it looked wrong against the earth. It seemed solid, yet somehow fluid too, as if it could decide what it wanted to be. She reached out first. Her hand was slender, hairy, shaped like the hands of the ape-kin whose rise had stirred this whole event. She touched the stone with one careful finger. The substance moved, not by rolling away like an ordinary rock. It bent under her touch, carrying the force through itself like soft metal, then settling into a new shape. The two stared at it, then at each other, and in their shared look, the wolf saw excitement. They learned quickly. They discovered that the stone could be used like a tool and like a living thing. It could carry, hold, and carve. It could press and fold and cut in ways their hands alone could not. They began to manipulate the world with it, moving ingredients to certain places as if building a recipe out of dirt and water and plant matter. They carved deep bowls into the earth. Crude cauldrons, rough at first, then smoother as they learned to shape the ground. The wolf watched in growing dread as the two did the one thing archetypes were never supposed to do. They touched the world, and the world answered. It got worse, or better, depending on what you believed. Before long, they discovered how to separate a single shining point from the crimson substance, how to hold it without losing it, how to lift it up and hang it in the evening sky like a bead on invisible thread. Stars appeared where there had been none. The night changed, little by little, into something decorated. The two looked up at their work and held each other as if they'd made a home out of the dark. 100,000 years passed like that, with days full of trial and error. They experimented constantly. They made and unmade. They pulled things apart, combined them, tested the limits. They were obsessed with shaping reality the way an animal is obsessed with survival. And all the while, the wolf watched. It had existed alone for longer than most things could imagine. It had no mate, no equal, no hand to hold. It had accepted that loneliness because it had never known anything else. Yet here were these two granted companionship from birth, and now, somehow, granted power as well. They were stepping into the one place that should have been forbidden, the realm where spirits could reach down and change the living world. The envy that had been burning quietly for ages finally became something else. Hatred. The wolf decided to act. It waited outside the cavern the two had made their home. The entrance was hidden by brush and rock. Cool inside, warmer at the back where they kept the crimson stone and their tools and their mixtures. The wolf did not understand violence the way animals did. Predation was familiar as a concept. It had watched countless hunts, but the archetype itself did not have the clean instinct for it. It had no practice. It had no natural rhythm for killing. Even so, it waited. When she stepped out alone, moving with that calm certainty of someone who believes the world is safe enough to walk in, the wolf sprang. Its teeth were untested. Its jaws were nervous, uncertain. What should have been quick became prolonged and ugly. She struggled, and the sound she made was not like an animal being killed. She gasped, as if trying to pull air through water. Her neck split under the wolf's bite, and what spilled out was not blood. Starlight poured onto the ground. It was amber and bright, like liquid night sky. It soaked into dust and grass and made the flattened earth glow. He came running at the sound. When he saw what was happening, he screamed. He cried. He pleaded. Not for mercy, not for his own life, but for her. He reached for her, and the wolf bit harder, not because it wanted to, but because it suddenly couldn't stand the noise she made as she tried to breathe. That sound, wet, desperate, failing, filled the wolf with a sick feeling. It felt like it was defiling itself. It felt wrong in a way it could not explain. The wolf began snapping faster, more frantic now, as if speed could erase what it was doing. Its bites were clumsy. They landed where they landed. They tore and crushed and ended things without care. The wolf cried while it did it. It did not understand its own tears, but they came anyway, hot and bitter, as it ripped the last of life from her. When it finally lifted its head, amber liquid clung to its jaws and dripped in slow lines to the ground. It turned and met his eyes. The emerald gaze that had once held endless contentment was something else now. Rage lived there, sharp enough to cut. The wolf felt a sudden terror so strong it erased everything else. It ran. Millennia passed. The two were no longer two. He remained, and he did not abandon his desire to touch the world. If anything, it became the only thing that kept him moving. Grief did not soften him. It hardened into purpose. He drove his kin, those early ape people, toward new ways of living, new ways of taking, new ways of dominating. He taught them to kill wolves, to break them, to make them fear. He taught them how to subjugate the wolf's descendants, not because it would bring her back, but because it would punish the pattern that had stolen her. But before any of that mattered, he did something else. He lifted his love into the sky. He gathered ingredients with a careful focus, like someone following a ritual older than language. He took ash from a sapling. He collected the light of dawn the way you might collect water, capturing it in the pale hours when the sun first broke open the horizon. He drew water from a spring that had only just begun to flow, fresh and clean, not yet claimed by any creature's tracks. He crushed these together into a paste, pale orange, smooth as clay. He mixed it in the cauldron he had carved into the earth long ago, the one they had made together. The mixture glowed faintly, as if it remembered what it was meant for. But he still needed one more thing. A life not yet lived. He went to a nearby pond and stole a swan's egg from a nest at the water's edge. The egg was warm, It held future inside it, small and quiet and waiting. He carried it back without hesitation and dropped it into the cauldron. Somewhere above, the swan felt the theft like an insult burning across her skin. He brought her body in after that, what was left of it, and he handled it with a gentleness that hurt to imagine. He laid her into the cauldron as if laying her into bed. Then he lifted what remained of the crimson stone, the strange substance that had made all of this possible, and heaved it into the mixture. He reached his arm down into the glowing bowl and stirred. The substance thickened. It brightened. The heat of it wasn't the heat of fire. It was the heat of transformation. As he stirred, the crimson stone changed color, bleaching into something pale as bone. The light it gave off turned colder too, edged with something sharp and distant, like winter sunlight. When the mixture was ready, he carried her outside. He stood under the open sky and spoke words that no one remembers now. They were not meant for human mouths. They were not meant for any living throat. They were the kind of words a pattern uses to change another pattern, the kind of sound a spirit makes when it tries to rewrite the rules. He raised her up and set her high among the stars. And there she shines to this day, fixed in the sky, a bright point of longing and memory, a proof that once something tried to love hard enough to defeat death. She did not swoop down and fight him. She did not confront him face to face. That was not her way. Her anger was colder and more patient than that. She chose a punishment that would last because she was an archetype too. And archetypes know how to make a rule and let it repeat forever. From that day on, she flew always high above his head, always just out of reach, always in position. She cast her shadow over him again and again, crossing his path, darkening his days, turning light into something that never quite reached him the way it should. She denied him the warmth he had once wanted to hand to her. She denied him the comfort of looking up and feeling blessed by what he had made. So he walked beneath a moving shadow, forever unable to stand fully in the light of his love. And the wolf, somewhere out in the world, watched the sky change and felt something twist inside itself. Because it had done what it had never been meant to do. It had reached for violence without understanding it. And it had learned too late that you can't unlearn a thing once you've made it real. Even now, in the way wolves hunt, and in the way humans build, and in the way swans glide above dark water, those old patterns still echo. The loneliness of the wolf, the distance of the swan, the ambition of the apekin reaching down, picking up a stone, and deciding the world can be shaped. Some nights, when the sky is clear, you can find the place where she shines. People point and call it by different names, making stories to fit what they see. They don't know what it cost to put that light there. They don't know what hatred first taught the world. But the archetypes remember.